have. I again urge the government, on behalf of the people in my community, the 10,000 or so currently receiving the supplement, give them a happy Christmas and a new year, one where they can feel safe and secure going forward. Keep the higher rate of the coronavirus supplement. Lock in an ongoing job seeker rate that is livable, that gives people the dignity, the respect and the means to look for work. And retain the ongoing powers to make sure that we have fair income tests, fair eligibility criteria, and tapering rates that are fair, that ensure that more people have the means to look for work, good work, and can secure their future and their children's future.
I thank the honourable member for Bendigo. The question is that the words proposed to be omitted stand part of the question, and I call the honourable member for Macnamara.
Thank you, Acting Speaker, and I'm very pleased to speak after the member for Bendigo after that fine contribution to this debate and echo many of her sentiments. And like so many pieces of legislation in this place, it is yet again up to the Labor Party to come and discuss these issues, why some of them are important, why some of them need to be changed, why some of them should be defended, and why some of them should be stopped. Yet again, another piece in this House comes to this place without hardly any government members, I don't think there was any in this bill, other than the minister, willing to stand up and discuss their own policy. This isn't Labor Party policy, this is the government's policy that yet again none of them want to get up and defend. None of them have the courage or the commitment or the passion to their own policy and legislation to get up in this place and bother to talk about it. Not one. And this bill will literally affect hundreds of thousands of Australians. Hundreds of thousands of Australians who will return to $40 a day because of what this bill does. And yet none of them turn up and front this bill. None of them turn up and front this debate. And yet this will be their legacy of coming to this place and tearing away support for those people and those Australians who have, throughout this pandemic, relied on government. This coronavirus support payment began because we face a global pandemic. And I remember the press conference that the Prime Minister and the Treasurer did outside the Prime Minister's office here in this building. And they spoke about how there was going to be a wage subsidy for those businesses that had to close their doors. And they spoke about how those people who found themselves out of work as a result of this pandemic would receive an extra $550 a fortnight. Everyone who was out of work was going to be looked after. And then bit by bit, they walked that back. They walked that back and started pulling away that level of support for Australians. Except one thing didn't change. One thing hasn't changed yet, and that is this pandemic is not over. This pandemic is still with us. And yes, Australia has put ourselves in an enviable position when it comes to managing this virus. But the virus is still here, and as we've seen only most recently in South Australia, how quickly we can shut down and how quickly things can change. And I sincerely hope, Acting Speaker, that no other state in this country, and frankly anywhere in the world, has to deal with another outbreak. But I hope that we see it out to a vaccine, an effective vaccine, before another outbreak. But dare I say it, there will be one. This pandemic isn't over. And more to the point, the economic fallout and the economic consequences of this pandemic will be with us for years. The unemployment rate will take years to recover. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope we have huge amounts of economic growth, but I'm not convinced yet that this pandemic is not going to take years for us to recover from. And yet we stand here with no government MPs willing to put their name and their voice and their time and their efforts into defending this bill, which will ultimately bring Australians, hundreds of thousands of Australians, back down to $40 a day in March, striking them to the poverty line. If this pandemic has taught us anything, it is that through no fault of our own, Australians can find themselves out of work. It has happened to my family, it has happened to my friends, and I'm sure every single member in this place can point to those people that they desperately care about, who have done the right thing in this pandemic and who have shut down their businesses, who have stood down from their work in order to do the right thing by others in our society. And what did we see at the start of the lockdowns in March or in April? We saw hundreds of thousands of Australians, many for the very first time in their lives, accessing the job seeker payment, accessing the support payment for unemployed Australians because of this pandemic, through absolutely no fault of their own. In fact, because many of them were willing to do the right thing by others, they were sacrificing, and the businesses that they were involved in were sacrificing some of the operations because the government restrictions, both federal and state, require those businesses to not operate in the way in which they usually would. And what did we see from this government? And what did we see from the Minister from Government Services? I remember the queues around the block of thousands and thousands of Australians wanting to access the job seeker payment for the very first time. And in order to do so, they needed a CRN number. And in order to access a CRN number, at that point in time, you had to go into a Centrelink office. And the government just sat there and the minister just sat there until the country and MPs on this side of the chamber were literally pleading with them to change the arrangements to access a new CRN so that people don't have to literally line up and gather when we're asking them to not line up and gather because of a pandemic that we face. And then finally, the minister, I remember it well, said, well, we have changed